I've got some really important news for anyone that's due to sit an SQE exam in or after October 2026. For the lowdown, stay tuned, but only after the jingle.
If you wanna be solicitors, why don't you come and visit us at SQE TV?
So the news is that the regulator, the SRA, have introduced a new reasonable adjustments policy, which is going to be implemented from all exams being sat from October 2026. So what do you need to do if you're thinking you might need to apply for a reasonable adjustment? Well, the first thing is, if you haven't already, and the chances are if you're not on a course yet, you may not have done this yet, you need to create a SQE account. And there's a link for this in the chat below this video. Once that account is set up, you'll need to complete a reasonable adjustments form, because at the stage right at the beginning of your SQE journey, what the SRA want to know is what your reasonable adjustments you need when it comes to sitting your assessments. And this is one of the important differences to the old system. You need to apply for separate reasonable adjustments for SQE1 and SQE2. And that makes a lot of sense because SQE1 is a purely multiple choice set of questions sat over 2 papers, whereas there are 16 different oral and written assessments for SQE2. So very different types of assessments that will need different types of support and adjustments for different candidates. You'll find the SQE reasonable adjustments form on the same SQE portal where you just set up your account. That was step 1, as you can see on the screen. Now, the form asks you a number of questions. Firstly, which SQE exam window do you intend sitting an SQE exam for which you're seeking a reasonable adjustment? So just to give you an indication, if you were a full-time student starting an SQE1 prep course in the month of September, you would almost certainly sit SQE1 the following January. However, if you were a part-time student starting in the month of September an SQE1 prep course, chances are that you'll be sitting SQE1 in the following July. You'll also need to indicate which is your preferred exam location or locations for the relevant exam, and you'll be given a drop-down list of all the venues available and be able to pick from those. Having done that, you need to specify details of your disability or condition and the impact that it has on your ability to take the assessment. And most importantly, you're going to need to upload all of your evidence in support of your application for a reasonable adjustment, typically doctors' reports, letters, that sort of thing. Now, one thing, wherever possible, we suggest you do, and I appreciate it's not always possible, is to ask your medics to consider the extent that your condition affects your ability to perform to the best of your ability in the SQE assessments, but provide an analysis from them in relation to each of the sets of assessments, because the requirements on candidates are very different for SQE1 and SQE2. It's no guarantee, of course, that the SRA and Kaplan will agree whatever recommendation your medics say, but having considered it, it will obviously be quite influential, I would have thought, on the final thinking. But you've got to remember that they always have to be consistent with candidates who appear to have similar conditions. So what happens once you've submitted your reasonable adjustments application? Well, you should receive an acknowledgement of receipt by Kaplan within 5 working days, and at the same time they should notify you who the person who's going to be dealing with your application is. They're known as a reasonable adjustment liaison, or an RAL. And that person may make a decision immediately because the evidence is clear and it's a relatively straightforward case, in which case they will make a reasonable adjustment proposal to you. But they might come back to you and say, we need more information, maybe there's evidence that's missing, or they need some clarification from the medical team that have provided the evidence, or something else. But eventually they'll make a decision even in those cases, and then it's down to you whether to accept or to reject whatever proposal Kaplan are making. Interestingly, if you look at the timeline there, there's no specific timeline in which Kaplan actually have to make a decision on your application or for you to accept the proposal that Kaplan have actually made, which is why we've indicated that on the timeline with a question mark. I suspect the reason for this is that it's not entirely within Kaplan's control, because in complex cases they're going to need more time to turn the application around. But to a certain extent, everything's going to be dictated as to when the relevant SQE exam window is starting, and for them to try and resolve the application as soon as possible before that, so everybody is ready in plenty of time before the window starts. If you're happy with the proposal that Kaplan have made for your reasonable adjustments, happy days, just simply accept it. But what if it doesn't meet your expectations, or perhaps your application was denied altogether? What then are your rights? Well, you can ask Kaplan to review your application afresh, in which case it is reviewed by a completely independent person, a senior member of the team, who will then decide whether or not the original proposal stands, or whether they consider that maybe a revised proposal should be made. If that is the case, they will refer it to the team for further consideration. In terms of timing, the review needs to happen within 10 working days of having received your request for review, and if it's referred to the team for reconsideration of the proposal, they have to come up with that revised proposal within 5 working days.
SQE TV.
Just to remind you, the contents of this video relate to SQE assessments from October 2026. If you're seeking a reasonable adjustment for exams that you're sitting before then, you need to consult the old rules, a link for which you'll find in the chat below this video. In the meantime, if you're enjoying this channel, please don't hesitate to give it a thumbs up in the usual way. If you like the channel, that's great help to us. And also if you subscribe too, and tap that notification bell if you want to find out as soon as our new videos drop. And as we always do, when we finish a video on SQE TV, we say, it's now time for the jingle.
If you wanna be solicitors, why don't you